Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the source material surrounding a globally recognized yet honestly a highly debated religious group, the Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, my goal today absolutely isn't to take sides. I'm just here to act as your guide, to help you really understand what this controversy is all about. We're going to balance the pretty intense alarms raised by critics with the denomination's own theological justifications. So let's decode it together. To do that, we're going to take a structured deep dive through 5 critical pillars. We'll look at social control and shunning, the blood transfusion ban, the handling of sexual abuse, failed predictions and doctrines, and finally, we'll wrap up with the New World Translation. All right, Section 1, social control and shunning. We really have to start with a heavy question. It's one I found sociologists and religious scholars debating constantly in the source material. Are Jehovah's Witnesses a cult, or are they simply a high-control religion? You know, cult is a label that carries a ton of weight, and it is fiercely contested. The divide here is just stark. On one side, you have critics like Anthony Hoekema arguing that the group demands absolute loyalty to its governing body, effectively stifling independent thought. They point out that the group views itself as the exclusive community of the saved. But on the flip side, the Jehovah's Witnesses firmly, absolutely maintain they are not a cult. They state that members willingly choose to obey biblical guidance, and actually that they exercise their own free will and personal conscience. So the real flashpoint in this debate centers on a practice called shunning, or what the church traditionally calls disfellowshipping. Basically, when a member is expelled, and this is usually decided in closed-door judicial hearings, for what the church deems unrepentant, gross sins, like sex outside of marriage or openly disagreeing with doctrine, they face almost total social isolation. The church bases this strictly on scriptures, specifically 1 Corinthians 5:11, believing it preserves the congregation's spiritual purity and hopefully might actually prompt the wrongdoer to repent. But man, the human cost here is immense. Activist groups like the Jay-Z Help Association and the Spanish Association of Victims of Jehovah's Witnesses, they really highlight the severe mental health toll of this social death. I mean, just imagine losing your entire support network overnight. Lifelong friends, even family members living outside your home, just completely cut off. It's a prime example of where strict theology aggressively collides with psychological well-being. Moving on to Section 2, the blood transfusion ban. So, for decades, Jehovah's Witnesses have viewed blood as literally sacred. Citing passages like Leviticus 17 and Acts 15, which command followers to abstain from blood, the church strictly prohibits the transfusion of these primary blood components. And just to be completely clear, this ban stands even in life-threatening medical emergencies. It's a stance that has sparked immense, ongoing friction with the global medical community. But here is where the policy gets incredibly complex. While primary components like blood plasma are completely banned, plasma itself is actually 95% water. The remaining 5% consists of minor fractions, things like albumin or globulins, and surprisingly, the church actually permits members to accept these minor fractions, leaving it entirely up to the individual's personal conscience. Now, this nuanced rule has drawn some heavy fire. A former governing body member, Raymond Franz, actually likened it to banning a ham and cheese sandwich, but allowing someone to eat the bread, the ham, and the cheese separately. It sounds kind of inconsistent, right? Well, critics definitely think so. Yet, the church maintains it's an issue of divine respect, not just fluid mechanics. For them, it's about treating blood as God's personal property while allowing medical flexibility in areas where the Bible is arguably silent. Okay, Section 3, handling of sexual abuse. Before we dive in here, it goes without saying that child sexual abuse is an abhorrent crime, and any institution's handling of it deserves really intense scrutiny. Within the church, a massive point of controversy is their two-witness rule. Based strictly on a scriptural precedent found in 1 Timothy 5:19, the denomination requires 2 witnesses to an event, or corroborating evidence acting as a second witness, before elders can apply internal congregational discipline to an accused abuser. In a real world, this biblical rule has sparked outrage. Activist groups like Silent Lambs argue that, well, because abuse rarely happens in front of an audience, this internal system inherently forces victims into silence to protect the church's reputation. The organization, however, pushes back hard on this. They state that they absolutely comply with all local child abuse reporting laws, that victims always have the explicit right to notify secular authorities, and that the two-witness rule is strictly for internal spiritual discipline, definitely not a substitute for the law. Let's look at Section 4, Failed Predictions and Doctrines. Central to the religion is the core belief that we are living in the last days. But their history is marked by some pretty emphatic end-of-the-world predictions that failed to materialize. Heavily publicized dates like 1914, 1925, and 1975 were heralded as moments when the current world order would end. And when those dates came and went, sociologists and critics fiercely accused the leadership of false prophecy. To adapt to these passing dates, the Watchtower Society has continually updated their end times timeline. For example, the official start of the last days famously shifted from 1799 to 1914. The Church explains these doctrinal shifts through a concept they call progressive revelation, essentially flashes of divine light clarifying their understanding over time. Critics, on the other hand, view it as just a convenient eraser for historical miscalculations. A real cornerstone of their modern doctrine relies heavily on dating the fall of Jerusalem to 607 BC, but this puts them in a direct collision course with secular historians, archaeologists, and ancient astronomical records, like the VAT 4956 tablet, which placed the fall 20 years later in 587 BC. Now, you might be wondering, why does dating a fallen city matter to anyone today? Well, because if the secular date of 587 BC is correct, the complex chronological math pointing to 1914 completely unravels. And that is exactly why this specific date is so fiercely debated. Finally, Section 5, the New World Translation. This custom translation of the Bible has drawn intense academic fire for rendering key verses in ways that perfectly align with their specific non-mainstream theology. For example, in John 1:1, mainstream Bibles read, "The Word was God," which supports the Trinity. But the New World Translation inserts an A, reading, "The Word was a God," thereby denying the Trinity. They also reject the traditional cross, translating the Greek word instead as torture stake. Some scholars do actually praise the literalness of the translation, while others accuse it of profound theological bias. And then there's the number 237. This is the exact number of times the translators uniquely inserted the name Jehovah into the New Testament. Critics are super quick to point out that this specific name doesn't appear in a single surviving original Greek manuscript of the New Testament. The Watchtower Society defends this action, saying they're courageously restoring God's name where earlier copyists removed it. Linguists, however, argue it breaks the most basic principles of accurate translation. Which really brings us to the heart of the matter. We've seen the theological defenses, and we've seen the devastating human impacts described by critics. It leaves us with an incredibly powerful question. Does a religious organization's absolute right to progressive revelation and its own scriptural interpretation justify the profound real-world consequences, like social isolation and major medical risk, experienced by its followers? It's a razor-thin line between religious freedom and human cost. I really hope this explainer helped clarify the complexities behind the headlines. Keep questioning and keep exploring.